Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, March 13th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 171 days, the game against Michigan in 262 days. It is March. That means it is time for March Madness. Trademark, no copyright infringement intended. Means it is time for the Big Ten tournament to start today in Minneapolis. Buckeyes do not play until tomorrow because all of a sudden Ohio State basketball is good? Question mark. But it has been quite a turnaround since the firing of Chris Holtmann and the replacement of him with a interim coach, Jake Diebler. And now the question is, how much further can Jake Diebler get this Ohio State basketball team to go? I'm joined today by Kevin Noon of BuckeyeHuddle.com. He just wrote a Big Ten tournament by the numbers piece at BuckeyeHuddle.com, which I thought was really interesting. Wanted to talk to him about that, as well as just sort of give a little preview of this week's Big Ten tournament. Kevin, heading into this, Buckeyes on a 5-1 streak since the firing of Chris Holtmann, and they have not played the strongest schedule, but they beat Michigan State, they beat Nebraska, they beat Purdue, who is projected as the number one overall seed in the country. 2 road wins. They hadn't done that since in conference play in 14 months. They hadn't won a single game. Jake Diebler won more Big Ten games this year than Chris Holtmann. I know after the Purdue game, Matt Painter said, listen. The coaching change had nothing to do with anything. If it was Chris Holtmann, it would have been the exact same result. So, okay, Kevin, assuming Matt Painter is not just covering for his buddy Chris Holtmann, what has been the difference that Ohio State basketball has gone from terrible and unwatchable to suddenly interesting and winning all the time?
Well, I think when you really look at it, it's a case of Ohio State is playing with house money at this point. Nobody expects the interim coach, especially a young interim coach who really has not been in the profession that long, that has not piloted his own program. There's no real expectation that he's going to get the job. So he can play loose, or he can coach loose. And I think that one of the real downsides in the Holtmann era toward the end was that he coached really tight. He would shorten his bench. He would overthink things a little too much, and that's when you would see the second half collapses. And under Jake Diebler, that's not been the case. Jake Diebler's not been afraid to go deeper into his bench. We're seeing more minutes out of Tyson Chapman, out of Devin Royal. We're seeing some lineups out there that maybe we hadn't seen as much of before. And it just really seems that the team has responded well in these situations. Sure, we can talk about that the schedule has not been as difficult as it could have been in some eyes, but is college basketball this year, are there really that many great teams? This is a down year for the Big Ten, in my opinion. This is not going to be a 10 bid league. Say that 10 times fast. A 10 bid league for any stretch of the imagination. This is, the Big Ten's going to probably be lucky to get 7 in, if we're being quite honest. And that's just with me going with all of the one bid leagues out there are going to present one team as opposed to the bid stealers and things of that nature. But when it comes to Ohio State down the stretch, I really just think that there is no longer this cloud of is Chris Holtmann going to lose his job? Who's going to be the guy that's going to doom this very well-liked coach? I don't care what people say on social. I have never met anybody who's like, I don't like Chris Holtmann as a person. But there were a lot of people that were like, it may be time for him to move on in terms of coach.
Yeah, I started really wondering when that trigger was going to get pulled after they lost at Michigan. Michigan is so bad this year. Michigan is like abysmally bad, one of the worst Michigan programs since, I don't know, like the Brian Ellerby era. And they lost at Michigan. And at that point, it was kind of like, all right, well, when is this going to happen? You do sort of wonder, boy, if the axe had fallen a little earlier and they had maybe picked up another win or two that among some winnable games in January and February, if they might already be in the NCAA tournament field. But either way, their Big Ten tournament run starts Thursday, 6:30 on Big Ten Network against Iowa. And Kevin, this is always an event every year where it just seems like, everyone fills out their NCAA tournament brackets. If you were going to fill out a Big Ten tournament bracket, it might be almost as difficult as filling out the NCAA bracket, because this event is such a random result generator every year, Last year, I don't know if you remember, this was like a vague memory at best for me. They were the 13 seed. They beat Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State before losing to eventual champion Purdue in the semis as a 13 seed. 2 years ago, they were the 6, and they lost in the first round to 11 seeded Penn State. 3 years ago, they were the 5. They beat Minnesota, Purdue, top seeded Michigan, and then lost in the final in overtime to Illinois. This is an event every year that I think you could just kind of look at it and go, yeah, just about anyone in this thing could be playing on Sunday, other than probably Michigan this year.
Yeah, exactly. This is not going to be a year for chalk in the Big Ten tournament, in my opinion. Now, watch, the top 4 seeds will be playing on Saturday, and wow, that was a miss. Freezing cold takes alert. Kevin's an idiot, but well, we've known that for a long time. But yeah, I don't really have a great read on what's going to happen because I've watched Purdue. I mean, and just take the Ohio State game off of the board. I mean, I've watched Purdue kind of mess around, and I think that Purdue's guard play is not good enough to win it all. And I'm talking in the NCAA tournament, but I think that they could run into some buzzsaws in the league. I've seen Illinois be a real Jekyll and Hyde team when Northwestern is getting a double bye. I mean, what is going on here? What exactly are we looking at? So I think that this is going to be a must-watch tournament for a lot of fans because unless you're a fan of that team up north, I think anybody, can string together a couple of games. I mean, and then it comes down to who's deep, who has enough of a rotation that you're not dead leg by Sunday. And, so there's so much into it. And I think that will Ohio State tighten up a little bit, knowing that the NCAA tournament is in consideration potentially with a deep enough run? Do we see some of those issues there, or does Jake Diebler keep just coaching the same way that he has for the previous 6 games to get the Buckeyes, to whatever point it may be? I mean, whether it's the NCAA tournament, the NIT, whatever may be in the cards, because you're right. It's kind of crazy to think that this team finishing, 9-11 in conference play. I mean, we were looking at a team that was racing Michigan for the basement this year. And now you have a team that, and I won't go so far as to say they're a dark horse to win the Big Ten tournament. That's a leap, but I wouldn't want them on. I wouldn't want to face them if I was another team in the Big Ten, because Ohio State's playing just about as well as anybody in conference right now.
This feels like one of these college football playoff conversations that we have towards the end of the football season, where it's like, well, they didn't have the best record, they didn't have the best whatever, but they're the hottest team in the country right now. I don't know that anyone wants to see Ohio State on their bracket. Joe Lunardi has Iowa as you need to win one more game. So there is a lot on the line for this Ohio State Iowa game. Iowa probably needs to win one more to get in. He has Ohio State as you need to beat Iowa, and then you need to win another one after that. I mean, is that kind of what you're thinking, that, maybe you get 2 wins and you're looking at sneaking into the back door and playing a game in Dayton on next Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that?
A lot of people still get hung up on that 20 wins number, and 20 wins is not what it used to be. So I don't look so much there, but I did say when Chris Holtmann was relieved of his coaching duties that what would it take for Ohio State to get into the NCAA tournament? I said, if they go 5-1 and he gets this team to Saturday in the Big Ten tournament, well, they went 5-1, and what you just mentioned right there would get Ohio State to Saturday. So, do I know that that's going to be enough? No, you just don't know. And as I had mentioned earlier, you don't know what's going to happen in terms of some of these one bid leagues. Do you have bid stealers? What happens with all of that? That's why this is such a great week. I have really fond memories of championship week when I was in college, and maybe going to class, maybe not going to class, and sitting around and drinking beer and watching all these games, all these, minor conference games, just to kind of see what was going to happen. Granted, when I was in college, there was a guy named Jimmy Jackson at Ohio State, so the tournament wasn't as much in doubt as it is this year. But yeah, it's kind of nuts to just think that This team is 4 halves of basketball potentially away from playing its way into the tournament. And yeah, people are going to be like, well, if you get in as an 11 and have to go play in Dayton in the first 4, you have to win that game to really consider yourself to be in the tournament. No, you're in the tournament. As much as we may hate 68 versus 64, I grew up watching 64. Well, what it is now, it's 68, and that gets you in, and that certainly is worth something. And it creates the question then of, what do you do about Jake Diebler? Because you have to figure that Ross Bjork is chomping at the bit to make a coaching hire there. And a lot of times hiring the interim coach is not sexy. But if this team sits there and has this meteoric rise and makes the tournament, what is the groundswell going to be like? What is the board of trustees going to think? I have no idea. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating, and I think there were a lot of, well, he'd have to do all of this stuff to be considered for the job, and he started checking those boxes. So it's a little more of a conversation than it was a couple weeks ago. We're going to know a lot more probably in 3 days or so in terms of where he might end up. But just in case we do for decades, Tony, first me, then Tony, did a column on first the ozone, and then now at Buckeye Huddle called the Tip Sheet, where we would sort of give you sort of rooting interest during football season. And this started during like the BCS era. And hey, Ohio State needs these teams to lose on this Saturday. So here's your tip sheet for conference championship weekend. Here are the other bubble teams, according to Joe Lunardi, who you are hoping to see lose early in their conference tournaments: Colorado, Virginia, St. John's, Texas A&M, New Mexico, Wake Forest, Villanova, Pittsburgh, Iowa. Ohio State could help themselves out there. Providence and Memphis. So other teams you maybe are looking to see take an early L in their conference tournaments that might help the Buckeyes slide in the side door with only one win if a bunch of that stuff goes right for them. We talked earlier about how this is a really unpredictable event, and the Buckeyes are a 10 seed. This is, I think you said, the first time they've ever been a 10 seed in the tournament. But you look back at over the years, the winning percentage of the 10 seed, not great, but there is some hope for the 10 seed based on what happened in last year's Big Ten tournament.
Right, I don't have the number in front of me. Funny that I wrote a by the numbers piece, but I believe it's 14-24 is the record of the 10 seed, and that could be a little bit off because of the doctoring of the books when you have vacated seasons and things of that nature. That doesn't change anything for Ohio State. Again, as you'd mentioned, I mentioned, Ohio State has never been a 10 seed or a 4 seed, strangely enough, in this tournament. But the 10 seed Penn State last year made it all the way to the championship game. The 10 seed has never won the Big Ten tournament, but has made the finals twice, last year being one of them, and obviously one other time. So it does show the unpredictability, and we have seen a double-digit seed in a lot of these years recently escape Thursday. I mean, because, Wednesday's all well and good, but we know at that point, you have 14 and 11 and 12 and 13 playing each other. So those are all double-digit seeds. But will a double-digit seed escape Thursday to get into Friday? And I certainly remember through the years, some years that have been really chalky when it comes to the Big Ten tournament. But I think in terms of a lot of the major conference tournaments, the Big Ten can be a little less predictable than other leagues. Does that go to the fact that the Big Ten is just so competitive in so many years, maybe this year notwithstanding? Or is it a case of it's just the Big Ten isn't all that great, and there's not much separation between 3 and 10 in your conference? Now, I don't necessarily know what the case is this year, but this is not going to be something if you just live and die by the numbers of saying, well, Ohio State has just got this huge uphill battle being a 10 seed. I mean, 10 seeds do win. There's never really been a case of where a 10 goes into Thursday as like a prohibitive favorite. So, I mean, we're talking about a lot of wins by underdogs through the years of this tournament that has gone on and keeps changing the way that it's set up, and will change once again with the addition of the 4 West Coast teams. But at that point, it sounds as if the plan is not all 18 teams are going to make it. So you don't have to worry about being an 18 seed and what's going to happen there, because you're going to be sitting on your butt at home and your coach is probably going to be cleaning out his office.
Well, heading into this last year of whatever the current format is, the 14-team current format before you get to whatever it's going to be next year, I did want to touch on one of my favorite random sports facts that you say it out loud and people go, that's not right. And then they Google it and they go, well, son of a gun, that's right. How about that? Big Ten has held their conference tournament since 1998. This is so long ago. The first conference tournament, Michigan won it and had it vacated due to the Ed Martin scandal. Yes, the same scandal that brought down the Fab Five banners. Also impacted Robert Tractor Trailer, who was the most outstanding player on that tournament team. And that first one got pulled down. 1998 is when the tournament started. 7 of the 14 current Big Ten teams have won. You wrote about this in your column. Ohio State, Michigan State, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Purdue. You will notice I did not say the word Indiana there. Indiana, Kevin, more than 25 years of this event, the Indiana Hoosiers have never won it. That ranks up there in terms of the craziest things. You think of Indiana as a basketball school, and that hasn't really been true for quite a while now. But even so, you would have thought they would have just backed into one at some point. They've been playing it right up the road in Indianapolis for a huge chunk of those 25 years. How? I don't understand. How is that possibly true? That's one of the craziest things I can remember.
Because let's look at Indiana coaching. Bobby Knight only coached 2 times in the Big Ten tournament, and he was at the end of his run before he went to Texas Tech. So Indiana has had a cast of characters go through Bloomington as head coaches, and it's been a minute since Indiana has really been worth a darn on a national scene. Apologies to any Hoosiers who are watching, but it's just true. I mean, you look at all the banners that are there in Assembly Hall, and there's just not a lot of ones that are of current dates. And then even when you do have a good team, bad luck in the big. It's one and done. You sit there and you have a bad game and you just don't win. But Indiana has flirted with it. I mean, oh boy, Indiana versus Purdue in Indianapolis. This is going to be amazing. And then Purdue's like, no, we're not going to allow this to be amazing. So, going to go out on a limb and say that streak continues. Indiana did give Mike Woodson the vote of confidence. He will be back next year. Their best player asked for a release from his letter of intent after that news came out shortly thereafter. So, I don't think this Indiana team, even with its big home win against Michigan State, is going to be able to string together a few wins to snap that streak. But it is kind of crazy because if you look at the Big Ten schools and you say which school is most synonymous with basketball, it's going to be Indiana, and they've just had next to no success in this tournament, and that's just it's unfathomable.
Yeah, in the Big Ten tournament era, the Hoosiers have won or tied for the regular season Big Ten championship 3 times. 2001 to 2002 under Mike Davis. That was the year they lost the NCAA tournament final to Maryland. They were the NCAA runner-up. They went 1-1 in the Big Ten tournament that year. Tom Crean, 2012 to 2013, they finished first. 2015 to 2016, they finished first. They never got more than 1 win. They are 2-3 all time in the Big Ten tournament as a regular season champion. That's a weird one. So they can't win when they're the top seed. They also can't win when they're any other seed. So Indiana basketball, see if the streak ends this week in Minneapolis. We will see if Jake Diebler can keep the streak going for the Buckeyes this week in Minneapolis. Should be a shockingly interesting week of Ohio State basketball. Did not see this one coming, but we'll see if the Buckeyes can keep it rolling this week in Minneapolis. We will have coverage at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We'll have coverage at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. All the usual places where you find our football stuff. We have basketball stuff there too. We will have football stuff there as well. Don't worry. We'll be back with another look at football tomorrow. Buckeyes currently off this week for spring break, but they will be back for spring ball, resuming with practice number 3 next week. We'll be talking about all of it at BuckeyeHuddle.com and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. We hope to see you there. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.